Hey everybody, today we have Whitey on, owner of a laundromat in the SMB world, a very popular target for a lot of folks. Whitey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. Looking forward to chatting today.
Yeah, it should be great. And the first laundromat called the Wasteria was opened up in Fort Worth, Texas in 1934. It was the first time customers could wash their clothes publicly. And now nationally, there's 35,000 laundromats with a market size of about $6 billion. Average profit margin there is anywhere from 20 to 35%. The average cash flow is around $15,000 to $300,000 a year. There's very popular targets for the small business world, given that they have high survival rates, and over time they've proven to be stable businesses in downturns. So Whitey, thanks so much for joining us. For those that don't know him, he's a full-time sales rep, and in his free time decided to go buy a laundromat out of COVID, and coming up on 3 years of operating with a ton about running and operating a laundromat location. So for folks that are out there and interested in it, today we're going to get into some of the hard questions on laundromats. What's there to actually know in terms of sourcing these deals, finding these deals, and closing them. And to start, Whitey, I think let's kick it off with a settle the debate question. So I heard you can buy a laundromat, hire an ops manager, and drink margaritas on the beach and collect passive income. What's your advice in that to the passive income crowd?
If you're going into this thinking you're going to have passive income, drinking margaritas, and not be hands on really in any capacity, this is the absolute wrong business for you.
I thought you might say that. So, folks out there is a lot of operational elements to this. And, especially if you're operating a 24/7 location like Whitey, you constantly have to be, aware of your business and plugged in. So, number two here is, I get a lot of DMs. Why would I buy a laundromat instead of starting my own? I think from the perspective of folks out there, there's a popular conversation online of what are the benefits of buying your business versus starting it in the laundromat space.
Laundromats specifically require a lot of heavy infrastructure. Thinking about the tie-in to a water sewer line where available, the infrastructure build out of the physical store, new machine costs, and finding a location and a municipality that, if needed, will allow that. It is a lot easier to walk into a store that exists today and remodel and what we call in the industry retool the machines versus trying to go ground up. You also, from a financial stability perspective, it is a lot easier to understand viability in an existing store versus trying to project via pro forma or other calculations on the likelihood of survival of a brand new store. So I am very much in the pro acquire an existing store and buy versus build, which quick plug for that book that I think anybody considering getting into the laundromat world especially should make sure to have on their coffee table and reference every once in a while.
Absolutely, and there's plenty more to get into in terms of costs you can save by buying. But we're going to focus this episode on actually identifying, finding, and trying to close a laundromat. That's a big focus for a lot of folks that listen into this. And for you, Whitey, let's go back to the origin story a little bit. Searching for a deal, did you have a specific industry in mind? Was it only laundromats, or were you looking at various options?
Looking at various options, I initially was very interested in the car wash and self-storage world, realized that the way I wanted to operate side by side with a 9 to 5, it would require me to look at other avenues for a purchase. I was heavy down the road of vending machines and laundromats and ended up executing on a vending machine business and the laundromat within the same 7-day week. Signed the vending machines on a Monday and the laundromat on a Saturday. And I highly recommend not doing that and staying very maniacally focused on one or the other.
I can imagine that was a lot in a 7-day period. And for folks out there, thinking about it on the laundromat side, what was your process in identifying where you wanted to spend your time trying to find this laundromat deal?
I think a lot of people overcomplicate trying to find a deal or, looking and comparing themselves to others in the industry. really comes back to home field advantage. I looked in areas where I had a network where I could, what I call, cheat the process of searching. I could understand who's an owner, who's a player in the area, is there upcoming development. So I looked in areas that I either had lived at one time, had family or friends in, and really focused in on those areas. This also led me to having a faster search because I was building in public, in the words of searching in public. I was not shy about talking to other business owners about my aspirations and goals to be similar to them. That opened a lot of doors for me. I had the opportunity that many overlook by mentioning it to folks in adjacent industries. I was told, hey, you should call this individual, or hey, do you know so and so? They'd be really interested to talk to. You'll be really surprised who wants to help and support you when you make your goals or aspirations available to them. I have not had really any experience with anybody not wanting to help or make an introduction, whether that be to anybody in the trades or anybody in a deal team, or, since purchase and looking at future acquisitions of other laundromats and other businesses. Everybody's always looking to help, especially if somebody's willing to put in the work and is somebody that's going to grind. And that's what this really is going to be, especially for the first 6 to 12 months between searching, closing the deal, and executing on actually opening the laundromat the first day of ownership. It's going to be a grind. It's not going to be, passive income on the beach. It's going to be very hands-on. And, people really understanding that and mentally preparing for that, I think, is really hard, because you can't teach how to run a business in a classroom. No offense to those that do, but this specific business is very heavily weighed in two regards. One side is searching where the socioeconomic and the population supports laundromat, but also mechanical inner workings of 40 plus machines that you are reliant on to continue to drive traffic through the doors. So when you're thinking about searching, you're thinking about areas where you're most comfortable, where you know people, you're going to need to be supported by a lot of people. Trying to really hone in there will really help make your search a more efficient process versus casting too wide of a net and not being able to ultimately execute within a reasonable time frame.
Got it. No, thank you for sharing. So you worked mostly through a hyper local search with your network, and also geographically. Laundromats are one of those companies that's very geographic focused and location focused. So it makes a lot of sense. On your end now, looking back, would you have introduced more brokers, online marketplaces to your search, or do you find that now that you're probably still actively searching as an owner, do you still rely on that network that you talked about to begin with?
I really struggle with this because I think in some areas you should always be working every angle. I think in laundromats, the best path is getting to an owner and really understand where their exit plans are, how the business is doing, and what the potential is for you to take over. So, laundromat specific, direct to owner. Everything else, it's worth Craigslist, brokers, biz buy sell, working with advisory groups that sometimes can help get you to a search quicker or get you into their ownership network. What one thing I think a lot of people overlook in this process, and I think about this in sales, is you need to be multi-threaded in your deals. You need to be coming at it from different angles and not try to only focus in one area. Having that wide net, continuing to bring it closer in, will be really essential across the board. But I really think in my heart of hearts, the ownership direct connection. Don't let anybody else interfere. Don't let anybody else manipulate any data, numbers, etc. Will really make it to the level of comfort that you should know to transact with that seller, or if you need to look for a different deal.
Direct to owner. For yours, how did you get in contact with your owner directly? What was for this exact? Without giving too much detail away, maybe. Was it through, you said your network before as an introduction, or did you physically go there and knock on some doors?
I really relied on adjacent networks. And what I mean by adjacent networks is I thought about folks in the trades, I thought about folks in residential appliances, I thought about folks in industries that would heavily utilize a laundromat for different services, wash and fold services. And what I did was I triangulated those different areas and went to somebody in one of these adjacent areas and just said, hey, do you know anybody that's in this space? This isn't something you focus your time and efforts on. That individual happened to own a laundromat and was very interested in moving on from that ownership for personal reasons and wanted to see it be put into good hands. So my search process and my way of getting a deal done is a little unique, but the ability to repeat that can be done by anybody that wants to put in that work and really wants to think about who to talk to, who in their network, and really that path to success, how they define it, or the speed at which they want to move.
Excellent. And from there, we can move more towards evaluating these businesses and how you filter and prioritize your time with these potential deals. So, what are some of the most important characteristics specifically for evaluating a laundromat that you think is compelling, and maybe take an angle of when you first started for those out there, and maybe then add on how you now look at them, what you've learned.
To start out, it definitely needs to be a place that you find needs improvements or really needs some touch up, etc. So when I first was introduced to searching and trying to evaluate and becoming aware of my own criteria, I would go and sit at these laundromats, do my own laundry there, take note of heavy traffic times. I'd try to mix up when I'd go. I'd also drive by if I was running an errand. I might take the long way just to see if there was cars out front, understand what could be challenges related to operations for the current operator, and really taking stock of what did I understand from the outside looking in as somebody that didn't know what was going on, but what I could surmise was going on. When you see a lot of out of order signs, or you don't see consistent hours of operation, or you see that there's a cleanliness factor, these are all ways to potentially bring yourself to thinking this could be for sale. In some cases, some owners just decide to let the stores go and hope that people still come in. Other owners have the mental gymnastics of thinking if they want to sell or not. So that was where the biggest things was out of order signs, cleanliness, parking availability, hours of operation, clientele, what was going on within the laundromats. Laundromats have a really interesting place within the global marketplace because everybody needs clean laundry, but not everybody has accessibility to a laundry unit within their living situation. So while some people may think that laundromats only survive in certain places with extremely high rental populations or within cities where people don't have cars and there isn't the accessibility to buy appliances, they can also survive in suburban areas where people need large machines to wash blankets. So just because you may be located in an area where there may be only one or two laundromats, or a laundromat might not be the most exciting business in your area, at the end of the day, no matter what goes on in the world, everybody needs clean clothes. That's not changing. And other businesses may or not be influenced by artificial intelligence or different movements in the world. Laundromat success rate is really tied to that ability to offer community service that everybody needs, whether they need it or not right now. I like to tell people, I'm still going to be here whether you need me or not, and I'm going to definitely be here when you really need me.
No, I mean, and you're right. People, I've had those moments, probably more when I was younger, but recently where we had a no washer and dryer in unit, and you get to those points where you really need to do your laundry, and that's a huge necessity. And I think in the age of ChatGPT, it's telling me here that 30% of U.S. households don't have an in-unit laundry unit. So that's a ton of people, depending on where you live and work. So with that in mind, it sounds like on the evaluating the business part, you looked a lot at the market dynamics and also the operational dynamics, along with just the financial. So it's not just the numbers. going into your due diligence process, so you're starting to prepare for your due diligence, how did you prep yourself for that process before diving in?
One of the areas of interest is what we call turns per day. And this is sometimes obvious to figure out when you're evaluating a laundromat, but sometimes it's not as easy. So, one of the things I would do when I was there was I would look and see what machines people were using and also the price. And I created a spreadsheet on what each machine costs per size at the different locations. So, I had an understanding of the location I was looking at was severely underpriced compared to the market. And I had to take that into consideration when I built my spreadsheets. With the turns per day, I also noticed that people were favoring certain machines and certain machines that there were only a couple of. They may have had most of them out of order. So, one of the ways that I took my evaluation from a financial perspective is I was given the access to what they call coin counts, but also the bill collection from the change machines, and was able to get an idea of what was really successful machines, but also where there was opportunity to raise the prices. These pieces of information are really interesting because the industry average is about 3 to 4 turns per day per machine. The interest around the turns per day for cost versus usage is also how you think about retooling said laundromat. So, one of the things I identified was I did not have consistent performance from the 60-pound washers that people that were once a year customers or twice a year customers doing comforters or coming back from a camping trip or random visitors. Those are the machines they demanded because they thought of a laundromat as bigger capacity than their own machine. So, one of the ways that I did my evaluation was I noticed the income was consistent. It matched what I was seeing when I was there. But what I also did was a future projection of if I raised prices to X and considered, putting in new equipment, how that could all work together as well based on the new equipment or lack thereof in my competitors around me. So, a lot of I'm not a traditional math person. My mother likes to joke that she wasted a lot of money on tutors on me growing up, and that I only learned how to do math when I received my first commission check and wanted to understand taxes and how I was not receiving the full amount that I thought I was for various reasons. Nobody here needs to have an advanced stats degree or anything else to understand the money coming in and money going out, but you do need to be able to look at a utility bill and think to yourself, okay, if I buy more efficient machines, can I bring my natural gas costs down? If I buy more machines, will that water bill come down? So, there's a lot in the due diligence process that's a push and pull of current operations versus future operations that I think some people automatically want to just rip everything out and put in new equipment, but that comes at a heavy cost. Figuring out how to work with what you have, evaluating the machines. Do they have factory OEM, original equipment manufacturers, parts, or are they third-party parts? Who serviced them? This makes a huge difference. If you had an owner that was servicing with third-party parts, the likelihood of the machine's livelihood is significantly decreased. No offense to those owners that do their own work or use third-party parts, but using a certified technician with OEM parts is a major hack to extend the life of a machine. And it's hard to tell without asking the right questions or looking for invoices or a line item in a QuickBooks output or a financial statement of parts and labor for servicing the machines. If a deal has no information or the owner can't answer those questions, that is a massive red flag from my perspective on major investment that you'll have to make the minute you take over to get your store operational and in a position where you will then be able to finance new equipment as those machines make money in the near term.
No, thank you. It's a very, very important part with these businesses. To your point, it's not so much just an output from QuickBooks. There's a lot that goes into these machines. They're a huge part of the business. So for those folks out there that are trying to get more familiar with it, can you just give me high level how you think about the lifetime of your average machine? We can, maybe give two examples. One with a OEM that you mentioned that they've used, congruently versus third party, And then number two, if I am going to go buy a laundromat, if I do have to replace the machine, what kind of cost can I think about for a dryer or a washer in a fleet of my machines?
So the machines that I took ownership of were actually older than I was at the time. I had machines that were almost 35 years old that were all
Wow.
factory OEM parts. So they, in their final stages of life cycle, were not cared for in the best way possible, but they, for the most part, were very well taken care of, and some of them were operational. One of the problems was the dryers specifically had low, medium, and high heat settings. At the end of 35 years of life, they were really only one heat setting. So that was problematic when folks would call and I would shrink their clothes because they put it on low heat and it was high heat. So on the other side, I had washers that had third party belts that would snap, and that puts the life likelihood and life cycle of the machines in a severely limited spot because the belt snapping, especially mid operation, is not good for the machine in every mechanical way. I had a couple of my washers that had those third party parts, and the cost is significantly different. The third party parts are cheaper, but when I think about that machine lasting another 5 years versus having to replace it, those machines were about 15 years old. I would have loved to have been able to get 5 more years out of them, but the cost to repair them constantly was not worth it. On the other side, to your question around new equipment, it's really going to vary. There's a lot of great options out in the market. I am extremely biased to Speed Queen, which is owned by a company called Alliance. Alliance owns Speed Queen, Hipsch, and a couple other brands. Speed Queen, in my opinion, is superior washer. Hipsch is the Toyota to Speed Queen's Lexus. So there are different options. There are different price points. Some folks prefer the look and feel of some of the other machine manufacturers out there. There's a few overseas. But a lot of it comes down to who is your distributor, who's going to service those machines. How I like to have folks think about buying new equipment is you really need to understand if that distributor is just in it for a short term win of getting your money and selling you equipment, or do they want to develop a relationship with you that is a long term play? You're going to have issues. You're going to have problems with the programming or the structure or just things you're not aware of with new machines, and you're going to need to rely on them coming back to help you. And I'm extremely lucky that my distributor for Speed Queen, Daniels, anybody in the New England area, highly recommend giving them a call, was very good on the front end of servicing my machines before we did a deal. And that gave me the confidence to buy. I had a poor experience with a different opportunity where, as a new laundromat owner, they couldn't get me on the service schedule for almost a month. And it was very hard to get them back to do future recommended upgrades and service work. So when you're thinking about the cost, you're probably looking for some of the washers anywhere from your residential top and front loader is going to be somewhere around 18 to 2200, all the way up to the washers, the big machines being $10,000 plus. And again, this is just for the machine only. One thing I want to make sure folks think about is when you do new equipment, you are going to have to upgrade infrastructure around them. So, for example, I put in new 30-pound machines and I swapped them out for old 30s. Well, the new 30s have a bigger drain pipe that required me to upgrade plumbing infrastructure that I was not necessarily budgeting or prepared to do, but it was a necessity to bring the machines back online. So there's cause and effect to retooling. It could be that you need new ductwork for dryers. Dryers typically are going to run 5 plus for a single pocket, and the double pockets, or what they call a stack, is probably going to start around 8 to 9,000, and that will require infrastructure changes as well, depending on the site of your store and what the current existing infrastructure is. You may need makeup air. You may need to adjust certain areas of the laundromat to accommodate this new equipment. So what I recommend folks do is when you are thinking of retooling, take advantage of that sales rep's understanding and institutional knowledge of what else could need to be done. Do I need an HVAC? specialist? Do I need a plumber? Do I need an electrician? Do I need drain cleaning? Try to make sure that you are covering every angle so that when you budget for that and you do your equipment loan, those trade specific services are not included in your equipment loan. So you have the opportunity to finance directly with a company like Alliance, or there's other funding sources out there, which we can touch upon. But the trade specific, some trade organizations will allow you to finance, but there is some of that's going to be cash required upon completion of a job. So a lot of different ways that some folks think you can just completely gut the place, take what's there, take the tie-ins to water and sewer and put everything in new, and it's all well and good. It's extremely expensive. Back to the thought around building versus buying. You're almost going all the way backwards to building ground up. I personally did mine sequentially, where I saw opportunities and then slowly moved throughout my store. I highly recommend folks figure out the closest low-hanging fruit to what you need and slowly move versus assuming all that financing or cash outlay that you might have tied up that could be used for other things. Other things in my case, I installed credit card readers on about 65% of the store instead of retooling the other 50%. Those credit card readers enabled me to then buy 100% coverage and then retool the rest of the store. So I had a long-term and short-term plan that worked in my favor. And I think people need to put it into digestible pieces versus trying to eat, the whole piece of pizza with one bite.
There was a ton of stuff in there. Thank you very much, and I think that's important too. In Whitey's perspective, he went after some of the revenue collection, but there's a ton of costs, and a lot of people skip over that part. So I think utility costs can be anywhere of 25% of your revenue for laundromat, whether it's electric, water, gas. There's a lot of utilities and a lot of stuff to get comfortable with municipalities and cities and regulations. So in that perspective, could you dive in a little bit more on, one, some of the benefits of buying versus building there in terms of having drain pipes and things like that already set up for you, and then two, how you got comfortable with the diligence around municipality, government, regulatory stuff that goes into this. So there's a high cost there, and also how you got comfortable with the contracts and regulatory stuff buying a business that's a laundromat.
In terms of the whole idea around existing infrastructure and municipality, etc., in the area I am in, it's interesting. You could go town by town. Some towns have city water and sewer, some don't, and a lot of people are on septic. Side note, that's a really big opportunity if you can find a laundromat adjacent to septic and well water. Well water and septic are really harsh on laundry and laundry equipment, so big opportunity for those that can figure that out in their target area. The biggest thing with the tie-ins and going back to building versus buying, the excavation costs, the tie-in, if you can even tie in. Again, I'm in an area where there'll be no further expansion in this space because of the stress on the infrastructure, especially competing priorities with new home building and multifamily and or large residential expansion. But that buying process, digging up, tying in, that's a lot of time that can take. There's a lot of risk with where does the tie-in exist? Do you have to be conscious of gas lines or other utilities underground? You are likely going to spend $50,000 to $100,000 just on site surveying, engineering, architecture before you even put a shovel in the ground. And those are costs that when I think about buying a store for $300,000 to $400,000 that needs some love and needs new management and new operational efficiencies, automation, etc. I look at that as if you start out at $100K just to get permitting, get ready to roll, that's a quarter of the way to a new build or a new purchase of an existing opportunity. Then everything is more expensive than you think. So a great example, when I replaced a drain pipe recently, the price of cast iron had skyrocketed because the accessibility of the specific type of cast iron I needed. When I think about building a new store, some of these costs, you'll get a budget from your different tradespeople, but those numbers are not locked in. You are not signing on the dotted line for concrete for your bases to be a certain price, or copper piping, which is highly susceptible to being stolen, especially if left unsecured or in areas that are easily accessible for thieves. So before you know it, you've taken $1 million build out and you're at $3 million. You're also at the mercy of municipality sign off. So one of the other big things that's really interesting is building a brand new store requires inspections from every inspector. If you take a new store over, you're typically only dealing with trade specific movement and potentially not needing an inspector. So how you interact with city government can also be really interesting with building and operating an existing store by way of a purchase, because your store might not be brought up to code. You might not have closed building permits. So one of the things that's very hard that some people have to realize is a seller might be hiding or concealing certain things, and you've got to make sure there's no open building permits or electrical permits, plumbing permits, gas permits, etc., with either a new build or an existing build, because things might not have been done in code, or you might, for some reason, find yourself in an audit. I heard this happen for a different style business where they were audited for code compliance and they had to make some pretty significant infrastructure changes. So what I would really default to having people think about with either a new build or an existing build is who you work with and who you are having sign up for permits in your name. Are they going to be able to complete the job? Are they going to go to code? Do they know how to do things the right way? Do they have experience with laundromats? There are laundromat specific contractors, but typically in each market, you'll have just your standard plumbing outfit or electrical outfit gas company that they don't necessarily need to know laundromats, but they need to be able to look at the manuals and understand this is how much gas goes into a dryer at this, temperature to, light the flame and dry clothes, versus them putting in too much gas and, causing a gas leak or, potentially damaging your machine. So one of the big things, again, with municipalities is the vendor relationships of those tradespeople with the municipality. Asking the tradespeople, do you have a good relationship with the inspector? Are they happy with your work? Are you somebody that's going to be able to get an inspection appointment? Some people can't get inspection appointments for projects. That's really important, because if you're waiting for an inspector because they don't necessarily like the work of your tradesperson, or the tradesperson did something wrong and it needs to be corrected because they didn't follow directions or code, you're losing money every second that's not approved. So
That sounds so painful.
it's extremely painful, but it's something that, again, people overlook. I, happen, not trying to plug people, but if you're in the Boston area, I use a company called 128 Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electric. And one of the reasons why I use a company that has so many trades within one umbrella is they're one group to work through everything with. So if you're building or you're buying a new place, you want to be able to call one operation to get a lot of work done at once. You want to be able to be a customer on file where, purchasing power makes sense, where you come in and you do business with them across trade lines, and you have more businesses or you have other opportunities to work with them. They love that. They love the cross promotion of being utilized, but they also can get things done. They can achieve a lot with manpower that, Dan in a van or Chuck in a truck might not be able to, especially if you're building on a new one and you're relying on one man operations. No offense at all, but you need a team in every capacity. You cannot be relying on an individual to get you up and running under deadlines unless that person's going to work 24/7 to get you up and running as fast as possible.
Yeah, no, it's a ton to consider too. You're already buying a business, or starting a business is just as stressful, and to bring in a lot of uncertainty around when you can actually turn on the revenue is a challenge, right? And a lot to consider for folks. Let's stick with the pain points. I think everyone's heard how great laundromats are, but let's do one more pain point here on the revenue collection, going to the sales side. So you mentioned that you switched over, majority of your machines to card payments. It sounds like 65% plus, maybe that's, higher now. Did you ever have an issue when you first started of actually collecting the coins and bringing them to the bank in giant buckets? And for, going forward, how much would you say the business has changed since you first bought it to now of credit card payments versus coin payments?
One of my favorite stories is during COVID, there was a coin shortage, and I was unable to purchase coins and had to go around to family and friends, and frankly, at one point, anybody that had, a tennis can full of coins or an old mason jar, old big Poland Spring water bottle full of coins to buy their quarters from them. What I quickly found was
Wow.
because I could not order them from the bank also wasn't excited about accepting them. So you have three options in the world that I exist in right now where they're willing to take them if you use their coin counter, or you could go to one of the big corporate coin counters. There's anywhere from 5 to 10% of a cut off the top that you owe them for using the counter. Second option is you can roll them yourself, which requires you to typically get a heavy duty machine that is a couple $100. The simple, occasional coin jar in your car rollers aren't going to work when you're doing hundreds of dollars at a time. And then the third option was the bank will provide you with Federal Reserve bags that you fill to the best of your ability to $1,000 increments. What the bank will do is they'll take each bag, they'll credit you $1,000. The Fed will weigh them and figure out precisely to the quarter. Do you have 1,000? Do you have 999.50? Or do you have $1,002 and they'll credit you accordingly? One of the problems, because we are moving to a cashless society, is even though I have deployed credit card readers, my machines take credit cards, quarters, and they take what we call loyalty cards. I still have a segment of my customer base that is cash only, and I welcome that. That's totally fine. I want to be as inclusive as possible to everybody coming through the door. To this day, I still run into the issue of banks not wanting to handle those coins. So it's one of the operational challenges that nobody teaches you and nobody talks about. Everybody online sees these videos of people with buckets of quarters. They see, people opening a machine in a coin box full of quarters and think that's awesome. The problem is it can create an operational headache for you. That money isn't making any more money for you sitting in a bucket versus being in the bank and paying bills or an opportunity for expansion. To your question around
Yeah.
credit card adoption, I have found that when I first deployed the credit cards, it was a very, very long curve of about 4 months where I maybe did 20% credit cards, 80% coin. As of now, I've flipped that to 30 or so percent coin and about 70% credit card. It does take some time. I only did do about 60-ish% of the store with credit card readers to start. I wanted to put them on the high performing new machines so that people saw a new machine with a new credit card reader on them. What I quickly did find out though is that because I advertised that I had readers but not on every machine, folks were competing for machines, and my hand was forced in a good way to credit card read every single machine. It also allows for operational efficiency. I ended up using a credit card reader that tracks coin and card purchases. So my ability to do financial reconciliation is live. I can log into my Laundromat credit card reader software and I know exactly my revenue up to the minute that is going on at a given time. So it created a lot of operational efficiencies from a coin collection perspective. I no longer have to count quarters. I can get the output and upload it into QuickBooks. And I also, within that specific software, can restart machines if there's an issue for people. So the credit card readers offer a lot of flexibility that sometimes people don't fully understand. And, it's a lot to digest when you think of all these mechanical pieces and parts. So doing a lot of education and finding the right credit card brand for your specific store is really important because it's going to be a big curve with customer adoption and perception.
Yeah, and it's really important for folks to know. I mean, you don't think about, it took you 3 years to get to that point in that flip. So congrats on that. But, the day one, you're taking 80% of your revenue down to a bank roller, or you're losing 5 to 10% off the top in fees for rollers, or, buying a big machine. So, just because people are picking up these big buckets of coins on the internet, that's something you have to deal with these banks, and banks are not as we move to a cashless society, maybe is willing to look at that. So those first few months might be, just another challenge that I just want to make sure we touched on. But congrats on, moving to that newer system and also being cloud based. That sounds a lot better than where you first started. I'm sure it took a lot of effort. So from there, I think now we've covered some costs, some headaches with your local municipalities, revenue. Let's go to the deal. So let's say you've done your diligence, you've gone through, you've identified in your network or with brokers. Let's talk about offering the seller a deal. Can you go through maybe how you approached your first acquisition, and then touch upon maybe some things that you would have wished you did differently or other structures you might have looked at?
Definitely want to have a deal team surrounding you. Definitely need to have a lawyer and accountant, and potentially in other larger transactions. Others, I was able to
Oh yeah,
sufficiently.
and did you have a lawyer and a accountant when you did yours or no?
I did.
Okay.
And I
Sorry, I
highly
didn't mean to cut you off.
recommend that everybody utilize those specific functions for their core expertise. They also should, in a perfect world, be working adjacent partners, not necessarily in partnership together in a business, but people that talk to each other or that will talk to each other. One of the things that I see commonly that people ask on different groups and online is, what formation do I do, an S corp or an LLC, or all those different formation structures? Do I do a sole proprietorship? That should be answered strictly by an accountant and a lawyer, and only by certified professionals. So understanding how to structure is part of your due diligence to ultimately make an offer on a laundromat. I highly recommend making sure that you have a lawyer draft your letter of intent, or LOI, really to understand what your goals are, what you're expecting the seller to understand that you would need from them, or that you're going to impose on them in terms of maybe a non-compete, or what you're going to offer for a price and terms and closure dates and due diligence periods. I, did a very, very simple letter of intent given my style of purchase. When I have looked at other laundromats, I adjust this letter of intent accordingly, especially based on what the seller's motivations may be for their future aspirations. So the last thing you want to do is have somebody set up shop right down the street from you, or already be in motion, and you then are competing against somebody that you just bought a business from. So you really need to understand legal guidance around non-competes or jurisdiction on competitive nature, especially given the hot topic of non-competes for employment. They are different, business versus employment. So you really need to have somebody that can break that down for you. You also need to have an accountant just be able to look and understand any patterns on financial accounting. And, I would not consider a forensic accountant or a forensic audit of the full books, depending on your purchase size. That's something your accountant should guide you on. But you should have an understanding of what you are expecting to buy, what you're expecting to see in revenue, and if there's any areas that you should be aware of that stick out to them in the process of review of the books. After that, as long as your due diligence period goes smoothly, especially, in that case, you should be joining the owner for a coin audit. You should be asking them very specific questions operationally. You should then be drafting the documents for the style of sale that you would like to perform with them, if that was not already agreed upon. I typically see laundromats go as asset sales, but again, you should be receiving guidance for many reasons from your legal and tax professionals, because that can have tax implications, it can have legal implications, it can have post-closure representation issues, depending on who the owner of record is, or did you buy the assets to a business and tax liability is on previous ownership. So, from that perspective, in my case, I operated with a lawyer and accountant. If you are doing a deal that is over probably 50 plus machines and, north of 5 to 600,000, I would consider doing an equipment evaluation, having somebody come in and look at the equipment, especially if there are questions around the legitimacy of, manufactured parts, OEM, third party, who service them, you would want to consider equipment audit. You also may need to have other niche consulting opportunities from people. Because of the nature of my sale, I decided to forego some of those opportunities, but having, as I mentioned before, I talked about 128, being able to have somebody in the trades come in and make sure that your hot water heater is going to work correctly, if the drain lines need to be jetted, if the electrical panel can handle what's going on. Do you run the risk of putting your panel in jeopardy? Is everything from a trade specific area all sound? You also need to make sure that the landlord, if the laundromat's not coming with real estate, is aware of a transfer of ownership. So one of the questions you need to be asking is the landlord comfortable with the sale? Is there an assignment clause within the lease? What does that look
Oh,
like?
I just had a friend who ran into that, and they were like 6 months down the road, and they hadn't talked to the landlord, and then obviously it fell apart. But it's a great point
It's
too.
There's a ton of deals that fall apart because the seller hasn't informed the landlord and the lease has exclusions to transfer. Some landlords want first right of refusal for laundromats because they're really good tenants. They're not going anywhere. It's really hard to return that to what they call a white box store, where it's just, like totally a white box with nothing in it, totally returned to normal rentable space for a future tenant. So, again, your lawyer should be advising that, but you should be asking the question, does the landlord know you're intending to sell? And you should understand very early on, but throughout the process, where the lease is at. Does it have options? How many years are left? And your negotiation ability. I've heard some stories recently of landlords that are willing to negotiate whether to extend the lease or to renegotiate because of the draft in the current lease of the process. But you might have to build into your financial models a lease increase. You may not assume a lease at a price that you're buying if you're going to renegotiate, especially if you're looking to ask for 10 to 15 years. They might want to put in some type of every year it goes up by CPI, but no more than 5% of the base lease price, or other areas where they will continue to raise the prices on you. These are all things that need to constantly be understood and executed in tandem with your deal paperwork. Last thing you want to do, to your point about your friend, is get 6 months down the line and the deal blows up because there were areas that were forgotten or were overlooked. Landlords typically do
Big
not.
tenant improvement costs handed to him at the last final hour that he didn't even know about, kind of thing.
Well, and that's so you can negotiate those things, but you shouldn't have any surprises in this process. If there are surprises, you need to step back, lean on your team, and reevaluate. Surprises in any capacity in this business specifically can be the wrong way to start off, and you should either course correct or assume the risk of a surprise of, oh, by the way, the water heater just went, I'm going to coast on it, or do the bottom level fix and transfer it over to you. And that's a large purchase that you need to make right out of the gate. I think another thing that a lot of people overlook that is not formally discussed often, and I try to make sure folks think about this, is you're purchasing the laundromat, you're paying for these services, lawyer, accountant, other individuals. You also need to build into your model a really strict understanding in specific areas that you are going to need cash flow in the first 30 to 90 days that will require investment that you might not be thinking of. For example, I have a heavily automated store, and that was part of how I looked at operations and how do I make it better for myself, but also my customers. One of the big improvements I made was I put automatic locks on my doors so that every single day the doors open and close at the same time. Nobody wants to go to a business and support you if you're closing it early because nobody's there, or you fall asleep and forget to open up in the morning because you overslept, or whatever. People do not care why. They just won't come back. They won't tell you. They just quietly will go to your competitors. So I ended up doing due diligence on automatic locks for the doors, automatic lights, automatic open sign. Only problem I ran into that I would caution people on is the door frames at my doors did not have the ability to have the locks that I had budgeted for. And I ultimately had to spend considerably
Interesting.
large sum of money. But something I want folks to take away is think about the opportunity cost and the value of your time. I value my time at a very high amount of money because I could be doing my day job, I could be doing other things, I could be walking my dogs, etc. Going to the laundromat every day, unlocking the door, turning on the lights, turning on the open sign, leaving, starting my day, and coming back at night and doing that. I looked at that as a very fast payback for a large investment of about $8,000 for the locks that I didn't want to spend at the time. It was a lot of money, but I think back to now I don't have to worry. I know the place is opening on time. I spent another about $1,000 in the automatic lights. I now know it. Opening times, the lights are on. The smart plug for the open sign. These are all, you might need a locksmith or an electrician for certain things, but you can install smart plugs. You can install automatic timers. I have timers on fans. I have them on my heating and cooling units. If somebody texts me and says, hey, it's really hot in here. Hey, it's a little chilly in here. I can, within 30 seconds, log in on my phone and completely change the customer's perception before they even realize anything's happened. I can just say, oh, I'll be right on that. Before you know it, they've got cold air or heat blowing, and you've completely overcome an objection for them not to come back.
Yeah, I think it's really important we're going to have you back on, Whitey, too, because I think a big part of this episode could be the whole post-close era. It's been 3 years since you've closed, and you've done a very measured, focused approach on when you spend that CapEx dollars, how it's spent. To your point, locks, one of the first thing you looked at from a peace of mind standpoint, and from overall just having to do something every single day, right? So there's value to each improvement, and doing those changes over time is super important. So I think we'll definitely have to have you back on for part two. And Whitey's going to be joining our community, so if anyone wants to jump on, he can give you all the good and real the good and the bad, if you will, of what you're going through in terms of buying a business. And so let's finish on that. I think you've been at it for 3 years. Just kind of touch on how long did it take you in the 3 years to figure out what you were doing? Some folks say it takes 12, 18 months to kind of feel like you know what you're doing. And then two, just share like what are the bad days like? What are you, truly in the fetal position over those years? So the good and the bad.
At about 18 months, I felt like I really knew what I was doing. I really started to see the fruits of my labor paying off. If you're really committed, you're focused, and you have your eye on the ball, you will get 1% better every day. You'll learn how to handle customer objections. You'll learn how to handle situations. I still try to learn new things. You are dealing with a very wide-ranging customer base that relies on mechanical machines to operate. So you have things competing with and against you, and you need to just step back and try not to take it personally, try to really understand that it's not a short-term win that you need to have. If it's worth the $10 to refund somebody, even though you know you're right, refund the money. Because that $10 that you refund them, that you may not have decided to return to them for a rewash or an issue they had, they could be worth $500 a year because they come every week and spend $5 to $10, or you have the folks that spend $30 to $40 a week. You really want to take time to understand your customers, what makes them tick, be there, be present, be accessible. I have a dedicated phone just for the laundromat that people call and text. I save their numbers and names. I answer, hey, John, how's it going? What can I help you with today? Everything okay? You have any problems? Really focus on looking at it from that perspective, and your speed to ownership paying off from a satisfaction, you being happy and you wanting to continue on will really go forward. In terms of the bad days at this point are few and far between, and I think it really comes back to what you really want to focus your energy on. I at first sometimes took things personally, especially I would receive really direct, aggressive communication when I would raise prices or I would make changes. I can very vividly remember a story of a woman walking through the whole laundromat, taking pictures of every single machine with an out of order sign, sending me the picture that she took of every machine, and berating me via text message. I'll never forget that because my first thought was, I don't know what axe this individual has to grind. I didn't know who they were. I couldn't figure out who they were from the video. But I had to take that as a point in time where this was only about 3 months in. I had just raised prices just a little bit to start to get money to buy other equipment. I realized, okay, this isn't personal. This person had a bad day or whatever. So try to really think that through. Right now, the bad days are sometimes things happen inconveniently. I was out and about last weekend and I got a call that the change machine was broken. I had to stop what I was doing, pop over to the laundromat. All I did was I took my knuckles and just gently punched the change hopper and I released a jammed coin. Again, it wasn't on my day. I had to cancel plans with somebody and delay them. But there are going to be times you have to inconveniently handle things, or you might get a call when you're not in a position where you want to take a call, or you might be busy doing something else and you have to answer the phone because people, it's the Ritz-Carlton, 3 rings, you need to respond. The bad days now are just, sometimes it's inconvenient because the phone doesn't ring for 10 days, then it rings. In the early days, there's a famous story, especially on the interwebs, that I had somebody bring in a bearded dragon. And I had a bearded dragon walking around the laundromat. And it was, brought in by a customer, put on the washers, and was just crawling around. Also had some situations where people just do dumb things and then call and, it's your problem. They overloaded the machine, but they expect clean clothes, but they don't understand that the sign says don't overload it or they're going to be dirty or they're going to be soapy and full of water. So, the bad days, I've been extremely lucky. I've had very, very, very few really bad fetal position days. Some of them, one very vividly, when I retooled the first part of the store, the first 9 months of ownership, I really did a poor job of understanding those trade-specific costs in a retool. I'll never forget, I was driving up 95 and I just wanted to be in the fetal position and wondered what was I doing. I was questioning everything. How am I going to afford an extra expense that the project was already over budget? What do I need to do? Stepped back, took a deep breath, and said, you're going to figure this out. This is going to pass. It's for the better. It's a requirement. I didn't have a choice, but you'll have to make financial decisions that will be hard to swallow at the time. Stay your 3 or 5 year plan. I always tell folks they're getting into the game, make a 3-year plan and a 5-year plan and try to execute to that as much as possible. Don't get too focused on anything too big. It's very rarely going to throw you off as a business owner unless you let it. You need to just stay really focused on what you're doing, your customers. You just got to keep the place really clean, the machine's operational, and be really friendly. The people will come. You don't have to do crazy things. You don't have to be giving away a TV every month or doing free dryers or doing all these crazy promotions. If you offer a great service, especially compared to your competitors, you will succeed in this business. Most of the people I see that have really bad days try to take everything personally, are really poorly, communicating with customers, aren't, on top of things, let things slip, especially if the place is dirty and people are giving you the feedback. It doesn't need to be, as nice as your own home or to be able to eat off the floor, but there shouldn't be trash everywhere. It shouldn't smell. It should be a place where you should be proud of, but you should also want to do your own laundry as the owner.
Well, we can end on that. Thank you so much. Keep the store clean and be nice to people is a nice message. And also, there's a ton more we can dive into on the operations on your next visit. But thanks so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. And anything else that you want to add before we jump off?
Excited to join the community. Happy to be a resource for folks. The biggest thing I want people to walk away with, because you started off with this, Dennis, is Do not believe the hype around passive income. This is not the rotisserie, set it and forget it for your Thanksgiving roast or turkey. This is a very hands-on operation and opportunity. You can remove yourself, but it is not passive income. And I want to make sure really folks take that away, that it's great marketing. People get the clicks, they get the videos, they do all those things. The day-to-day is vastly different.
Yeah, that's, we can say it, but hopefully it settles in with people. But thanks again for joining, and ton to dive in here for folks. Let us know any questions and feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, gents.